Hello, and welcome to Central Booking, where writers and readers are the authority. I'm your host, John Valeri. Today's guest is New York Times bestselling author, renowned attorney, and media personality Lis Wiehl, whose first exposure to law and disorder came at an early age when she would overhear conversations at the dinner table between her dad, an FBI agent, and her mom, an English professor. For her part, Lis earned a bachelor's degree from Barnard College, a Master of Arts in Literature from the University of Queensland, and a law degree from Harvard. Then, like her father and grandfather before her, she became a federal prosecutor in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Seattle and holds the distinction of never having lost a case she brought to trial. Later, Lis became a tenured law professor at the University of Washington School of Law in Seattle, where she ran the award-winning trial advocacy program, and has also been an adjunct professor of law at New York Law School. Lis remains a highly sought-after media commentator and has been both a reporter and legal analyst for NPR's All Things Considered and NBC News, and served as a legal analyst for the Fox News channel from 2001 to 2017. Additionally, she hosted the Legal Lis radio show and Wheel of Justice podcast, among a variety of other popular ventures. And Lis writes books, with 19 published to date. Her first titles were nonfiction: 2005's Winning Every Time, How to Use the Skills of a Lawyer in the Trials of Your Life, and 2007's The 51% Minority, How Women Still Are Not Equal and What You Can Do About It, which won Books for a Better Life's 2008 award in the motivational category. In 2009, Lis released her first work of fiction, Face of Betrayal, and has since written multiple suspense series as well as a standalone novel. Naturally, these books feature lawyers, journalists, and other characters she knows a thing or two about. Most recently, Lis has teamed up with Lisa Pulitzer to launch a trio of true crime exposés chronicling infamous cases and criminals. The first, Hunting Charles Manson, was published in 2018. The second title in that series, Hunting the Unabomber, came out in April. It takes readers inside the unprecedented, multi-jurisdictional investigation that resulted in Ted Kaczynski's arrest, after he perpetrated at least 16 bombings over a 17-year period before finally being captured in 1996. Booklist gave the title a starred review noting, "The action progresses with drama and nail-biting intensity, the conclusion foregone yet nonetheless compelling, a true crime masterpiece." Perhaps it's no surprise that the child of a law enforcement officer and an educator would herself become a crusader for justice, both in person and on the page. But we'll let Lis unravel that story for you. So your dad was an FBI agent, and both he and your grandfather, if I understand correctly, were federal prosecutors, which you also became in your life. So I imagine that leaves quite an impression on a young child. So can you talk a little bit about what it's like to grow up with those gentlemen as influential figures in your life?
It made it hard to steal from the cookie jar, that's for sure. I'm really dating myself here, but I remember, because there was a rule of no television before homework. And my dad had come home, driving to the driveway, and I'd run away from the TV and go downstairs to be doing my homework. And I really am dating myself. And he'd come in and put his hand on top of the television. And I'd hear this, "Please." Busted. So that's what it's growing up with the G-Man for a dad.
Yeah, I know.
Get
You
away
lost
with anything.
the television. I'm like,
Because it's warm.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, they know. They
They
know.
know. They know. I mean, nothing. I couldn't get away with nothing. So anything, I should say. Correct my grammar here, but I'm talking like a kid. Yeah. So yeah, third generation federal prosecutor. I mean, it's not like I grew up from that age of when I was just delinquent watching television before doing my homework, knowing that I wanted to be a federal prosecutor and work with FBI agents. But I did grow up with the rule that we had to have dinner at the house every night. Didn't matter what was being served or anything like that, but we had to have dinner at the house. even if you were out, playing with your friends, doing whatever, after school activities, sports, because I was big into track and cross country running, you had to have dinner. My dad's stories. And there were stories, of course. There were stories about catching the bad guys and, just about at the time, I didn't realize that they were about bank robberies and about, murders and all sorts of really bad guys and really interesting bad guys and chases that took years because he would come back and talk to my mom. I mean, my brother and I were listening, but he was really talking to my mom about some investigations and things like that and things that were going on. And I was just listening to these stories as they would unfold over the weeks and the months and the years over the dinner table. And it was intriguing, but they were stories to me.
Sure.
They were just, I didn't know that they were cases and investigations and all that. And my mother, on the other hand, my mother immigrated from Denmark. I'm first generation immigrant on my mother's side from Denmark. And she got her PhD in English literature and was teaching at the local college. So just when I was saying I couldn't get away with nothing, if she listens to this now, she will call me right up and say, Lis, that was a great interview or whatever, but you couldn't get away with anything, dear.
Yeah.
I mean, she always corrected my grammar from a very young age and was correcting, all the time. And so, I was kind of doomed eventually.
You really on both ends.
Yeah, I was getting it on both ends from a law enforcement standpoint and from a writing standpoint because I love to read. I love to read. And we lived a bunch of places because when I was in the FBI, obviously we traveled around a lot, but we eventually settled in a small town in eastern Washington state. And it's a lovely town. It's my hometown. I love that town. I still have friends there. I go back there every year. It's great. But we lived out in the country, and which is still great. It's beautiful country. There just wasn't a lot for a kid to do. There weren't a lot of there wasn't a thing called play dates. That's not an invention they had back then. And so, what you did as a kid when you went during sports, you read. And I read every book in my little library in elementary school and middle school. Literally every book. I went back years later, and the librarian said, she showed me the library card. She says, you read every book in this library. And everything, biographies, anything, engineering,
Sure.
mechanical drawing, I'm kidding. But anything that there was, And mysteries, of course, were what I love best. Nancy Drew, Encyclopedia Brown, Hardy Boys, trying to solve the mysteries. I love that stuff. So I guess, from a very young age, it wasn't like I was inculcated with it. It wasn't like my dad was saying, you will grow up and be an FBI or a federal prosecutor. I just was drawn to it. I loved stories. I loved naturally that. And, it kind of just morphed after a while.
I guess when that's what you're surrounded by. But I loved Nancy Drew too, and I really thought we were going to end up together. And people are like, she's a fictional character. Like, okay, but she was real to me. She still is.
Absolutely. We know that. That's what's so true about characters, right? Is that and as a kid, growing up, my brother is 9 years younger than I am. So there was a lot of years where I was kind of an only child. And so the books and the characters really became, and we were, fairly isolated, became sort of like friends, and I start thinking at a young age, those characters and those books and those stories became very real to me. Sure. And even now, especially now when I write the mysteries, those characters become like my buddies, like we're going out for pizza next week and we're doing this and that. And that's how they develop over the series. When I write a character that I have her develop over a book or two, and it's amazing well, Erica's doing this, and now she's doing that, and Cassie's doing that, and it's wonderful. And then they just kind of take off, and it's like, no, I'm not doing that, Lis. How dare you write me doing like that? Okay, well then, alrighty then. They develop their own lives, which is great.
No, it's true. And people say that all the time. My characters are talking to me. I hear them inside my head. And I'm like, but it's okay when you're a writer. Like, that's.
But the psychoanalyst would say, I'm just a writer.
That's really right. I'm just a writer.
I hear voices in my head, but it's really okay.
True. It's the best excuse you can possibly have.
Absolutely. We are really sane.
True. And of course you have a whole, bookshelf of books to prove that, you actually are that writer.
Yeah. I keep proving, like, really, I am a writer. Look, it's true.
You walk around with your books just in case.
Just in case. When they see me murmuring or taking notes of people. Look, it's for research. I'm writing down your conversations. I'm not an eavesdropper. Well, I am, but it's for research.
That's right.
I really am taking notes about what you're saying, but it's going to go in a book.
Absolutely.
Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't.
No, it's true though. I listen in on conversations all the time, and I'm like, there's a great line of dialogue, and how do you get more authentic than, borrowing something that you actually overheard? Like, that just
exactly. It's just borrowing, and they should be thrilled that you're taking your words and putting them in your book.
You're immortalizing them. It's a great gift.
What a compliment.
Moving forward a little bit now that we have this wonderful insight, but I do want to talk briefly about your days as a federal prosecutor, because I would assume storytelling and coming up with a compelling narrative is a pretty big part of that job. So can you talk a little bit about what it's like to come up with the narrative that you want to tell, and then how that lent itself when you sort of switched gears and started writing fiction and nonfiction?
Well, being a federal prosecutor, first of all, it's the very best job in the law, I think, my humble opinion. I loved it. And to be a trial lawyer, before you forget about stepping your foot into a courtroom to present a case, before you even start thinking about your case, you have to have what you call a theory of the case. I mean, what is it that you're trying to do? What is it you're trying to prove? So-and-so murdered so-and-so. That's a pretty good start. Well, what's your theory of the case? Why? What's the motive? Why did they do it? How did they do it? Then from that theory of the case, you got your theory about how and why, what was the motive, what happened. From that, only when you have your theory of the case can you build witnesses, right? The people who you're going to put on the stand to tell about the who, what, where, when, why, what happened. Because the jurors who you impanel, the people that you're going to be hearing the tale of what happened, they know nothing when they sit there, right? They're just coming in off the street, had a nice day, and now you're going to tell them about how somebody was brutally murdered.
Right.
You need to do that. The only way to do that is through the witnesses, through these live witnesses. How else are you going to tell them? How else are you going to tell them the story? Through pieces of evidence, exhibits. Well, how do you get those exhibits to the jury? You get them in through the people. The people that you have to match the people with the exhibits. How does person A get exhibit A into the witness's box, right? Or the jury box. You have to match all of those things together. How do you do that? Through your theory of the case. What's your story? How does it put together into telling a compelling story? So a good trial lawyer, even an adequate trial lawyer, I think, has to be a compelling storyteller, because you have to be able to tell that story, the theory of your case, your who, what, where, when, and why, to a jury who's just coming in off the street, who doesn't know anything about your murder, about why, who, what, why it happened. Only way you can do that is through witnesses and exhibits and telling that story. you've got to be able to tell that story through those witnesses and through those exhibits. It's all about storytelling. There's
Sure.
no question about it.
Well, it's a fabulous training ground.
Absolutely. It's a very serious one. I mean, we were just kind of, laughing about mystery writing and dialogue and everything. So transitioning from being a federal prosecutor and having somebody's liberty in my hand, taking it away, which is, of course, my theory of the case. At the end, that's what I wanted to do. There's nothing more serious than that. And knowing that the only way I could do that was through strong storytelling so strong that it would storytelling through truth, through these witnesses and exhibits, that it would convince a jury beyond a reasonable doubt that my story was in fact, the veracity, the truth. That was a heavy burden for me as a prosecutor. I mean, the heaviest, beyond a reasonable doubt. Can you imagine going from that to the freedom then to write when the worst thing that could happen is you wouldn't buy my book? I'd get a bad review. I wouldn't get that star on book list. I mean, yeah, that's a bummer, but nobody's not going to go to jail if I screw up, if I don't tell a good story.
Sure.
Being a federal prosecutor and holding somebody's liberty in your hand, and if I screw up, somebody might not go to prison and it might be my fault. Now, I could always say it's the jury's fault. They didn't do their job, or that's the jury system, or, oh, well, I tried my best.
Right.
That really wouldn't cut it with me because I'm tough on myself.
Yeah, and you always feel the ultimate responsibility.
Yeah, I wanted to put the very best case on that I could. And fortunately, I never lost a case that went to trial. So,
well, that's pretty impressive.
Thank you. I mean, but I always knew that the guy was guilty.
Right.
And it really, that burden was really with me. But that I'm telling you, that was pretty powerful storytelling and a pretty powerful training ground.
I'm sure. So that leads me naturally to my next question. So what made you, decide that you wanted to step outside of that world and sort of embrace it as a writer of fiction? And do you find that you get a different kind of fulfillment from writing fiction than you did as an active trial attorney?
Oh, absolutely. I went from that into teaching. So I taught at the University of Washington in Seattle, and I actually ran the trial advocacy program and taught students how to be trial advocacy lawyers. And my first book wasn't fiction. It was actually called Winning Every Time: How to Use the Skills of a Lawyer in the Trials of Your Life. And it was actually teaching regular folks, non-lawyers, how to use these storytelling skills in their own negotiations. You're negotiating a lease, you're even in a relationship and you're having a difficult time. How to use skills that lawyers know and that I've been using in the courtroom, how you can use those. So that was kind of my transition into my actual first book. And that I cut my teeth with that one. And so I was kind of still in my storytelling mode, but very much mired in the legal world. And then I said to my agent, who I'm still with, I love my agent, I'm friends, we've been together since, well, that book was published in 2004. That tells you how long I've been writing. And I said to him, I said, I have read Nancy Drew since I was a little kid, and all these things that we were just talking about. I really would love to write mysteries. And he said, well, Lis, it's very rare that people go from writing nonfiction, serious sort of books like the one you did. And I also wrote 51% Minority, How Women Still Are Not Equal and What You Can Do About it. And I actually got a one prize for that. And he said, so you've written 2 books. So it's really unusual people go from doing that to writing fiction. And I said, I know, but I really, really want to do it. And he said, okay, let's see if we can find an amazing publisher that will be a match for you. And wouldn't you know, I found Thomas Nelson, who's now with Thomas Nelson HarperCollins, imprint of HarperCollins, who I have been with ever since. And they just embraced my fiction. And now they've embraced this nonfiction true crime series. And we've had this run of all these books.
Yeah, it's
They've
pretty
been
impressive.
so loyal to me. Yeah. And it's just been a dream, just a dream to find this publisher. So that was back in 2005.
Yeah, it's
And my agent said, let's just do it. We're going to find you that publisher. And we did. And we're still here together.
gonna say did right by you, but that's pretty impressive to have that same group of people. I was actually surprised when I was doing my research to see that since your first novel, all of them have been through the same publisher,
Yep.
especially considering fiction, nonfiction.
Yep.
That's amazing.
We're just stuck on each other.
And,
We're going steady.
loyalty is not a bad thing. I mean, it seems to be working on both sides, so why mess with success? But that's terrific. And I did want to ask you, because you have, written nonfiction and then you transition to fiction and then back to nonfiction again. So before I ask you a little bit about the hunting books, can I just ask you, now that you're writing, these true crime books, they still, they have to be page turners, they have to be
Yeah.
suspenseful. But unlike the novels, the novel is all about, who done it and or possibly why done it. And when you're writing a true crime book, you already know, most likely who done it, especially if
Right.
it's Kaczynski staring back at you from the cover of the book,
Right.
or Charles Manson. So can you talk about how you're able to still create that element of suspense, even though it's characters or a story that people either already know or think that they know?
Well, that's the difficult thing, right? And I would say there's a couple, there are challenges with writing this true crime series, because there's a challenge in the research. You've got to get, unlike the novels and mysteries, exactly, where I'm drawing more on my experience and, cases I've either prosecuted or cases I covered, things like that, or things in the news, and I can mishmash things together. In fact, I can't
Right.
put anything too close to actual truth, right? It
Right.
has to be a little bit off of the actual truth, because I don't want to get in trouble. I mean, to be too close to actual one person. Here, it has to be like a law review article in the closeness of the truth. I mean, I was a tenured law professor, so I know how to write law review type articles in the sense of the research that's involved, where you just have to research everything down to, your toenails. I mean, it's tough. I mean, it's grinding. It's not the most exciting, most glamorous work in the world, especially when you're talking about characters like Manson and Kaczynski that are historical, that there's a lot of documentation. Kaczynski wrote a lot. Manson, there were a lot of trials, a lot of different characters. So you're looking at archives, you're looking at lots of different stuff. So you've got that going on, to one part of your question. The other part of your question is exactly, the conclusion is foregone. The reader knows that the person is, in the case of Kaczynski, locked away. In the case of Manson, he died right as I was putting the editorial finishes on Hunting Manson. So we literally had to change the ending chapters. He was very sick, and it was like, oh, pull that, he's dead.
Right.
Change those chapters, write a little bit new about where, the estate, issues that are going to be going on with the estate, fighting about the estate. So, okay, make those quick changes before we go to publication. But the actual the actual conclusion about the hunt itself, of course, is foregone. So, but how to still write this? Because my readers and I want a thriller, keep you going, keep you thrilled. It's funny. It sounds hard, and it kind of is, but it shouldn't look hard when you're reading it. It should look easy and fun. And it is hard, because that's why this took there's 2 years in, almost in between. But it kind of flows too once you get in the groove. And with Kaczynski, I had such an amazing inside source with this one FBI agent who was just a gold mine of information and unique perspective, and really never been, I mean, I'm not blowing this out of proportion, really never have been seen before angles on the case. Right. So it really was new. It really was different. It really was, wow, you're never going to seen this before. Conversations you've never heard before. Angles on this you've never seen. And oh my gosh, are you kidding? They almost did what to the Unabomber investigation? They almost closed it down. Yeah. I mean, stuff like that. I mean, so, things like poppers that... Right. Thrillers that I wasn't expecting when I went into this investigation, which is kind of the fun part for me as a journalist, going into it going, I don't even know what I'm getting into. Did I know when I went into Hunting Manson that, I was going to be sitting down as close to Tex Watson as you and I are? Well, you can't, I don't know exactly how far you were, but almost as close as my computer is. Right. And you are. I mean, sitting down next to Tex Watson, that close in a prison cell? No, would have scared the out of me, but I did. I didn't know that when I started research for that book. So you get into these amazing, scrapes or wonderful adventures.
Oh, sure. And I think that, if it's unexpected to you, then it is going to be unexpected to the reader.
Yeah.
Because I know, I've read both of the books and I'm thinking, what more is there possibly to say about Charles Manson? Then it's like, oh, there's a lot to say.
There's a lot.
And I won't claim I didn't know much at all about Ted Kaczynski. I mean, I was aware of who he was and what he'd done generally and, his capture. But I was probably a very young teenager when he was finally captured. So I didn't, have the awareness that he was, 2 decades, worth of violent crimes and all of these investigations, multi-jurisdictional. So yeah, it was very eye-opening. And like you said, you have to find that angle or that entry point that's somehow unique. But well, kudos to you, because you've done it with 2 books so far. No pressure or anything like that.
No pressure at all.
None. We said it here first, right? But I think that's a fun thing to be able to do, especially when I come into it as a reader thinking I've heard this story before, I know this person, and to be surprised, I don't think there's anything more thrilling for a reader, especially when it's a true life story that you think So coming back to the new book, Hunting the Unabomber, let me ask you about that. I do want you to, if you wouldn't mind, talking a little bit more about your relationship with Agent Webb and how he sort of helped you develop or figure out where you wanted to go with this book. But also, I want to ask you first, there were a lot of misconceptions about the case. Some of those were the result of the Discovery Channel miniseries, which took some liberties and, did what those shows sort of tend to do sometimes, is combine a lot of facts and characters into one. And so you think that you're getting the true story when really some liberties have been taken. And I know that there were some misconceptions that you wanted to set straight. So can you talk a little bit about what those misconceptions were and how this book dispels those?
Yes, I mean, and that's really how I got to one of the reasons that Patrick Webb was, and he's the FBI agent that was heading the task force, Unabomb task force in San Francisco for so much of that time. And what he was so upset about when I found him, he had long since retired. He was having an idyllic retirement. And, Lis comes knocking on the door saying, I want to talk to you. And I sort of used my federal family key, as I call it, saying, I'm the daughter of an FBI agent. I was a federal prosecutor. Please talk to me. And, he can't, I'm not just a journalist, you know what I'm saying? It's rude not to talk to a daughter of an FBI agent, especially I mentioned my dad's name. He said, I think I know we know some people in common. And even it's rude not to at least have a conversation. He could certainly turn me down later.
Right.
But when we started talking about Kaczynski, he said he was upset about the discovery, and I think this is what ultimately led it beyond one conversation. He said that he was so upset by it because he thought that if Americans watched that docuseries, and it was a long one. I watched it. I think it was like an 8-parter. It was very good. It was kind of exciting, and you got to like this one agent, this one character. But they made it sound like this one character had pretty much gone in there and figured out the whole Unabomber investigation by himself, wrapped it all up in this linguistic bow, and then had multiple meetings with Ted Kaczynski himself. Like, no, I wouldn't say became friends with him, but like had an understanding with him, you know, communicated with him, all of this kind of stuff. And Patrick Webb, Agent Webb, just said, first of all, this was a major team effort. The FBI solved this as a team. It wasn't just the FBI, by the way. It took Ted Kaczynski's, brother David and his sister-in-law to respond to the manifesto. But I'll get into that in a little bit. But anyway, it wasn't just the FBI that did it, but the FBI did it as a team, their part. And this guy, although he was part of the team, and I talk about his role in the book, he never even met Kaczynski. I mean, you can make stretches in a docuseries, but that's a big one. And that really upset Agent Webb.
Sure.
Because it just really, I mean, there were other examples, but it just really, like I said, he said, I know some people are like you know, that they, and why not? What they remember are things like, you know, the iconic picture of the guy with the hoodie and the sunglasses, or they might remember maybe the idea of the manifesto and the guy being picked up they might remember the sketch of the cabin in Montana, but that's it. And yet they do remember, they do know Unabomber. It's an iconic sort of thing, you know. Unabomber, oh, that's like Unabomber. It's in our lexicon. So you need to know, if it's going to be in our lexicon, you need to know what the correct history is, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So Agent Webb thought, you know, Lisa, if you're going to get it right, I'll help you. And I said, well, if I'm going to get it right, I need all your help. I need all your documents. I need everything spelled out. I need you, Agent Webb, to march me through what happened. And I need all your friends too, all your sources, all the people that were back there, all the profilers, everybody to be helpful to me. And this was a huge, huge ask of anyone. And it was especially a huge ask of him because he was dying of cancer at the time.
Right.
So a huge, huge ask of him, which he gave graciously and graciously.
Right. And you know, what a gift to the idea of truth, because it's funny, not haha funny, but I was telling my wife that she likes to watch these interviews too, and I thought that she would find this one particularly interesting because again, she doesn't have, you know, a great knowledge of that case beyond the miniseries because she was so young when it was actually wrapping up. So she saw the miniseries, and of course, you know, she thinks that's what went down. And then I read your book, and I said we were doing this interview, and I'm like, it's going to blow your mind because a lot of the things you think you know are not the case at all. So she's actually excited to read your book, but to really get that perspective. And if we can expand on that a little bit, can you talk about, you know, the teamwork that it took, the time that it took, and all of these? It was so many agencies. I mean, it was not just the FBI and local law enforcement and you know, the post office and school securities and airlines. I mean, it blows your mind when you realize how many, you know, people there were involved in this over so many states, and the fact that there was no, you know, centralized way to combine all of this in its investigation at the time.
Well, that's and you just said it, the last part. At the time, you were right. It was ATF. It was postal. It was multi-jurisdictional, meaning states and local and federal, and FBI, obviously, and all of these agencies and sheriff's offices. Because in the offices there were deaths. And some interfighting, and I talk about that. I don't mess around with that because Agent Webb didn't, and I kind of get into that lack of communication and egos that were involved. I get nitty gritty into that because I
Yeah.
think that's important. But throughout all that, and because of that, and in spite of that, and all of that, what's really important, and one of the things to remember is we were back in the day before, texting and computerization the way we have it now. They were back in faxes being sent, things being typed in Quantico at the FBI and being sent back, and having it taken 3 weeks to get your typing material sent from field offices sent to another office, that kind of thing. But this investigation and this marshaling of interagency and extra-agency forces was really the first time that this kind of power happened for such a large, long-standing effort, and was successful at the end, by the way, and really serve as a model or a precedent going forward. So not only was it important for the Unabomber and catching the one guy, but it was precedent setting under Janet Reno and what she did in this case. And I don't want that to get lost. I mean, yeah, there was a ton of money involved, and it was the most expensive and the longest hunt in FBI history, and I highlight that. But this was a precedent-setting case in that way. And we have to kind of turn our eyes back and remember he was caught in 1996.
Right.
A lot of things have happened since then, but this was a precedent-setting case for law enforcement, which is kind of cool when you think about it.
No, it really is. And until I read your book, I had never thought of it like that, because you think of the world that you live in now, and then you take a step back and you say none of this technology existed. And you mentioned before, but one of the things that really surprised me is how many times the case was almost shut down because they couldn't close it. So many
Yeah.
people wanted off of the case because
It was a dog. No
I
one
know,
wanted on this case. They couldn't
yeah,
solve it.
right. And then of course, on top of the fact that you don't have the amazing technology that we have today, you also have, Ted Kaczynski's criminal mind, and he certainly did not make it easy for anybody to identify or capture him. So can you talk a little bit about, his means and motives and how he was able to sort of avoid attention for as long as he did?
Well, okay, means and motive. Good you put those together. First of all, motive. That was what was so hard. Again, as a trial lawyer, you go to motive, right? Sex, revenge, money, all those things. There was never any note. There was never any ask for money. There wasn't anybody revenge. He tried to blow up a plane, so we looked to the FBI looked to see whether or not any recent firings on that airline. Any disgruntled employees that ran all those people down. Nothing there. So revenge, they couldn't figure out any revenge because the people that he targeted were university people, scientists, people like that. And then, then a plane, it was all over the place. It was just the targets what was one to have to do with the other? It didn't make any sense. So motive, the thing that I would always look for first and foremost in trying to find somebody, you don't have to prove it at trial, but it sure is important to try to find somebody, couldn't figure it out. Means. He's in this lone, now, nobody knew this, of course, if I didn't know it, but at the time, he's in this lone cabin outside of Lincoln, Montana, doesn't need much to, feed himself, can of beans, whatever, literally a can of beans.
Right.
And he's making these bombs because he's so smart. He is a Harvard wunderkind at 16. He went to Harvard at 16. He's making these bombs out of things he finds in trash cans, rubbish bins. And he's so clever. He's taking the serial numbers off of batteries. He's wiping fingerprints. He's taking any trace that the FBI would, of course, send back, when the bombs imploded, they would send the bombs back, the parts of the bombs back to Quantico to get them looked at, see if they could trace the batteries back, any components of the bombs, any parts of those bombs back to any material, Cincinnati, could you check it back to Michigan, any part of the country, just to get a trace on where the bomb maker might have bought, from a hardware store. Couldn't do it because these bombs couldn't be traced. Any part of the bomb couldn't be traced. That's how good he was.
Right.
And he was perfecting his art as he was going along. Again, because he wasn't going into hardware stores to buy this stuff. He wasn't doing any of that. He wasn't making the common mistakes that bomb makers now make when we can pick them up pretty fast.
Right.
I still say we when I talk about the FBI, don't I? I mean, they do. But, he was really good. He was really good.
I know, and it's certainly, the fact that he was able to do this for almost 20 years, and it's not for, lack of manpower or lack of man hours, because like you said, it really was, the scope of the investigation was unprecedented, and ironically, it was Ted Kaczynski's sort of his own words in his manifesto that came back to bite him. Which, there's a twist ending to a story where people get their just desserts. But can you talk a little bit about that, how that ended up being his undoing, and how that relates to his brother and sister-in-law, who you mentioned a little bit ago?
Yeah. We don't want to give the whole story away, but we can say that, yes, he did. First of all, we don't know that it's Ted Kaczynski. The FBI doesn't know who this writer is, right? He just writes as FC. So FC could be a they, an entity, a woman, several people, several men. They don't know. They don't know it's Ted Kaczynski. But they get this request to publish a manifesto from FC. And FC says he wants it published in a reputable, he doesn't want it in a Playboy, for example. Playboy makes an offer for it. Yeah, that's not going to go with FC. But wants it published in the Washington Post or the New York Times. And he says if his manifesto is published, that he will stop killing. I mean, it's pretty simple. I mean, he does sort of say, well, I do sort of take the, I may do a little sabotage on the side, but I won't do any more killing.
Right.
And then I have a couple chapters in the book where I talk about the high-level meetings between FBI and the Washington Post, New York Times, and not just the FBI, ATF, all of the groups get together. Because you can imagine the scene, and fortunately through ATF, through Agent Webb, you don't have to imagine. You can be in the room. But how that must have been, because here now the Times and the Post saying, wait a second, we don't bargain with, this guy is a known bomber. We're going to bargain with him. He's killed people. We're going to bargain with him. First of all, we don't know that he's going to stop. Second of all, we don't know that this is going to lead to anything. And we'll be seen as bargaining with a known killer, a bomber. What is that going to do for our integrity as journalists? So, and the FBI, the same thing. We don't bargain with bombers and murderers. We don't do that. And the first, not to give too much away because I want you to read the chapters, but the first, it's not too hard for you to imagine that the first call from both sides was, we're not going to publish this.
Right.
No, don't do it. But you know that the manifesto was published, and the prevailing wisdom was that by publishing this, it's not that they thought that he would stop. They knew they were dealing with a madman.
Right.
Or men or things or entities or foreign nationals. They had no idea. They had no idea. But maybe somebody would see something in the manifesto that would lead them to a clue, because they were coming up empty and they needed leads. They needed help. And they thought maybe this might break the case open.
Right. Right. And it's funny, but it's one of those stories, really, and you would know because you've seen these real life cases. But people say that truth is stranger than fiction, and it truly is. So I think we've talked a lot about hunting the Unabomber, and like you said, we don't want to give everything. So we can move away from that a little bit. But I did want to ask you a couple more questions, if you don't mind. But one, you collaborate on these books, and I would imagine that you sort of have to, in terms of time and all the information that you're absorbing and collating. And of course, when you write a true crime book, it's a much slower process than writing a novel, because you have to stay true to the story and do your research and put it all together. But can you talk a little bit about your collaborative process and what you and Lisa both bring to the table, and how that, individually what you bring, and then how that combines to make sort of this really, really great storytelling team?
Lisa was so terrific working on this book with her. She is an amazing researcher. She knew exactly where to go for certain things. There was so much to look in Michigan, for example, because Kaczynski had left so much of Kaczynski's writing, troves of it were in Michigan and could only be gotten through Michigan. And as you said, I mean, there's just only so much that I could get through, and you can only put so many of the writings, and we only put just little tiny snippets of it into the book. But also, the FBI went through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of leads, and we wanted to make sure that we'd gone through as many of those as we could in real time, and go, call as many as we could, and go through so much of that. And so it was great to have Lisa to go back and forth through things. She went through so much of the great research, and then throughout this book, just to have somebody in a 2-year process like this to bounce ideas back and forth off from. Writing is such a lonely process and such an insular process. I love collaborating with people, because then you're not alone the whole time. You can pick up the phone or just write on any old time, an email or a text, and say, hey, what do you think about this? Or there were a couple of times I remember very distinctly where in this book I layer a few things about myself in there, because I'm sort of a very, very light narrator. Patrick Webb is the main narrator, but this is told in first person, but Patrick really leads it. But it is my voice. I mean, I actually am reading the audiobook, and so it is sort of first person. And there were some funny coincidences with my life and Kaczynski's. I went to Harvard, and I lived in San Francisco when he was there, and when he was planning the bombs. There were just some interesting things. And so Lisa had some great ideas about how to weave that in. And I'll just give you one example that I never would have thought of. She said, how'd you get into Harvard, and how'd that process work? And what was it intimidating for you at all? I said, well, I was older. I mean, I was, 22, and Kaczynski was 16. She said, yeah, but that's still pretty young. What was that process like? And I just mentioned to her about how I almost didn't apply. But for a boyfriend who spotted me the $40 for the application, I wouldn't have even applied to Harvard. And she said, write about that. I said, huh? And I wrote about it. She said, we've got to put that in. And that's never, it's only a chapter. It's only a paragraph. But I never would have thought even to put that kind of color in there, because I don't really, it's sort of like, why put myself in there like that? She said, put that in there. That's great. I said, really? Well, let's put it in and see if the editor cuts it. And he
Right.
did. So it's nice to have things. It was just nice to have her bounce things like, and enlisted from me things I never would have enlisted from myself. If that makes any sense?
Sure. Yeah. No, there were some really surprising parallels, and I liked, the little moments of the personal, because I always feel a little bit more connected to the author when you get that.
Yeah.
So kudos to her. I guess she was right.
Yeah. I think she helped me do that, because I think I'm a little shy.
Sure.
And I don't think I would have done that. And I think she was really great about doing that, especially, and on the great research and just a great camaraderie. And even now, she and I are like texting back and forth about like, oh, do this, or that's rad, or that's great, or you got that book list review, that's great, or yeah, we got this, or
Oh, yeah.
It's just nice to have a friend along the way too,
I was going to say, if you look at your track record with how long you've been with your agent, your publisher, I mean, you two are probably going to be at this for a very long time.
It's just nice. It's just nice. The more, hey, especially in today's new weird world, the more connections we can have. I mean, it's always been true, but especially now,
Absolutely.
it's just nice. The more love, the better.
Right, we all need a little love, and we can get it through Zoom, which is great.
Exactly. Who knew Zoom? I didn't even know Zoom 6 weeks ago, but now I love it.
I know, now we're all experts,
I know. Well, I'm not an expert.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't go that
far. And my kids are so impressed. Mom, you know how to do Zoom? I'm like, yeah, I'm quite an expert. Right, now the whole thing is going to go down. I said that.
Yeah, right.
Oh, no.
Well, that almost seems like an ending point, but I do have one last question for you, because I hear that you are yet again on the hunt, and I'm not going to ask you who you're hunting, because you can tell me, and even if you could, you wouldn't. But can you just give us a little bit of a teaser of what we might expect next from you?
Oh, well, I'm on the hunt, and that it's going to be somebody or something or entity that is going to be super socially relevant now, because there's always lots of bad guys to write about. But if I'm going to spend 2 years of my life, as this takes, researching and writing and doing all this, it's going to be somebody who's really socially relevant to you today, like Unabomber is iconic. Right. So you will, when you see this, you'll go, oh, that's what Lis was talking about. That's my socially relevant today, even though it won't be published for another year or so. It'll be super socially relevant even then.
Oh, I'm sure it will.
And super intriguing. You'll find out stuff you will never have heard about. And I hope to just kind of keep building.
That's awesome.
I'm super excited.
I was going to say, I can't wait. And now
but I can't tell you, because it's like the price is too high, because then I'd have to come and poison your tea or something. And it's like, it's not worth it.
Especially now. You don't want to get on a plane or any of that.
No. It's just not worth it for anybody. Just wait another year and a half, and then you'll get the book.
All right, I can.
I'm working on it feverishly. As soon as we're done with this interview, I go straight back. My editor is mean, and keeps me on a tight deadline.
I know.
Hear this?
Like, why are you on Zoom right now? And you could.
I know. Oops, we're not recording anymore. No, he's really nice, but he does keep me on a deadline, which I like.
Well, hey, it pays off for the readers too, because then we get our fix. Even if we have to wait a couple of years, it gives us lots of time to speculate, which we certainly will do. But Lis Wiehl, thank you so much for your time. And the book is Hunting the Unabomber. Again, we've got a starter review and book list, which is excellent. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to chat with me. And I can't wait to see who you're hunting next.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure.
That's it for this episode of Central Booking. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a thing.